It's 11 o'clock. The discussion today is based on Meyer's book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, where he tries to explain why intelligent design can be proven by biological, cosmological, or mathematical reasons. A disclaimer right off the front is that you can neither prove nor disprove the existence of God. It requires a bit of faith, and there's no scientific evidence for or really against, although some might debate that issue with me as far as the against.
Well, it's pretty clear that from a scientific point of view, God is not a scientific question. You can't prove or disprove. If you can't prove or disprove something, it's no longer a scientific question.
That is correct. It is a question of faith.
Well, wait, maybe we just haven't figured out how to prove it yet. There's a lot of science that wasn't proven for a long time.
I forget who it was who said that anything that we, haven't figured out how to prove is magic, basically.
Right.
And I think God is in that category of magic.
I think we're giving ourselves too much credit.
Well, good. We certainly shouldn't do that.
Yeah, Paul Tillich liked to use that argument by saying that God is basically the mystery that we don't understand. And once we understand it, whatever aspect of it is, it stops being God and becomes part of science or mathematics. And then the mystery goes away, and there still is mystery left. And that's what we use by the rubric of God, not necessarily one that is a entity that designs things or controls things.
Somebody once said God is the sum total of man's ignorance. And the less ignorant we are, the smaller God becomes. And I think that's pretty accurate.
Well, that means the less ignorant we are, the bigger we are.
Yeah. So the question on this intelligent design is that it's full of fallacies and can be really considered dangerous because it keeps cropping up every 10 or 20 years. Comments?
Well, first of all, I have to say that first video about his book, Stephen, blew my mind. I don't know how anyone could have that many dates and that much information on the tip of his tongue at all times. I was wildly impressed by it, boggled sometimes, but wildly impressed. I'm sorry, what was your question again?
Well, that's why it's so insidious, is that he has this veneer of science around him that he pulls out and uses such a word salad that it confuses everybody.
And he lies because most of his alleged scientific fact is just rehashed balderdash, not science at all. So I can make up all kinds of things. Did you realize that not all squares have 4 sides, and not all triangles have 3 sides? And that's a scientific fact. I can say that with great assurance because I have no qualms about making things up, just like Mr. Meyer.
What would be one example of something that he made up?
Oh, all of it.
Well, I don't know all of it.
Well, no, I mean, where to begin? He first he falls into his whole process starts out. Basically, what he's doing is pushing the prime mover idea that since everything has a cause, we must go back to God. But see, that's the great fallacy from day one, is that sure, everything has a cause, everything is deterministic, there is no free will, but uh, the whole prime mover thing, you don't have to go back to God. You just have to go back to the first cause, whatever that may be.
And of
And at
course,
the
you have to
moment,
ignore the fact that what caused the first cause.
That's the issue.
well, that's the point. The argument is you cannot have an infinite causal chain. My question has always been, why not?
Mhm.
Why can't there be an infinite causal chain? Isn't that what the Big Bang is all about? That that prior to the Big Bang there was something there that then changed. What what that thing was, we don't know. But as far as we know, there is an infinite causal chain. So who cares? Fine, that's great. Does it make any difference to you when you get up
Isn't
in the
God
morning?
defined as the uncaused cause?
No, it's an infinite chain. That's the beauty of infinity. It goes on forever. There is no prime mover. That's just the way the universe is. It's like water is wet, up is the opposite of down. Uh, the causal chain is infinite. You don't have to end up with God.
Yeah, well,
Why do you have to end up with God? What's wrong with an infinite causal chain? I love it.
of course, that whole argument is based on a deductive series made by Aristotle, which he called him the unmoved mover.
Yeah, well, Aristotle thought heavier things fell faster than lighter things. He was kind of an idiot, one of those overrated geniuses who uh,
Jump in,
the
Amy.
only reason we still read Aristotle is he was, quote, rediscovered by quasi-literate monks in the Middle Ages and resurrected as a logical proof of God. So,
Yeah,
you know,
Aquinas in the Summa Theologica.
I
yeah,
discovered a new term for my feelings about this, and it's pantheism, which explains exactly how I feel. It's irrelevant to me if there's a God or not. Hey, if there is, and he's great, and there's all this great stuff happening after, bonus. But I believe that living your life the best you can and not hurting others, et cetera, the golden rules, it's irrelevant. You know, I don't do nice things because I'm afraid of God. It has no relevance for me. On the other hand, it had complete relevance for me for over 20 years, and I still can't shake that. And so I would not be having this discussion with my children because in a million years, they could never forgive me for this because it's like the ultimate sin to say you don't believe in God. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he exists. Maybe he, she, it, you know, would exist. Something exists, but I don't know what it is. And it really doesn't matter all that much to me as long as I'm living the best life I can.
ABC, you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, since I didn't get didn't know where to find the stuff that supports this discussion, I don't know what Myers eventually concluded.
He concluded that there was an intelligent design.
And he based it on kind of three ideas. And I don't remember what all three of the ideas are.
There was a lot of information in that talk.
That's right. Can you summarize the three principles that he was talking about, Bob?
Yeah, biological, mathematical, and cosmological proof.
But he specifically, one of the things he said was, one of his arguments was kind of a Goldilocks argument that for the universe to work and have the objects in it that are there, and those objects include us, there are a bunch of things that just have to be set just right, because otherwise gravity doesn't work and many other things. And so,
So was his conclusion from those three aspects that there was a God spirit or there wasn't?
There was a God, and not only was he a God, but he was omniscient and omnipresent, and had a hand in putting together the way everybody acts.
and he put it together in a special way where it all worked.
Yeah, so he has
So
a
is
problem
he
with
regarded as an omniscient spirit?
He never used the word spirit.
He never used
he never
right,
used the word spirit, but
and he didn't
entity
define.
would be a better term.
Well, if I follow the lady that I can't see what her name is. Anyway, I mean, should we say the way I personally look, and I'm just going to give a very brief, rather late in life, I came to the conclusion that I was two people, a human physical and a human spirit. And when things sort of got out of control, I realized that I instinctively reached to what I might call a higher spirit that might give me solace or fix the problem or whatever it was. And in a nutshell, that's really where I'm at from a belief point of view. And in terms of joining you, I'm an Anglican UU. How's that?
That's fine. That is fine. The thing that, one of the things that bothered me was that he was a little ethnocentric in that all his argument was based on Judeo-Christian
Yes.
Right.
history, and he discounted anything from the East or any other forms of knowledge or belief.
It was quite smug, actually, I
He was
found.
quite smug.
And he part of the reason he said that is he said specifically other cultures like the Chinese figured out metallurgical tricks and things like this, but only in the West did they develop a science based on empirical observation and testing things to see how if their ideas actually worked.
So, well, did the Chinese kind of just fall into it by accident?
Well, they got into it by fiddling with things.
Yeah. Many years ago. Yeah. Huh.
And not just the Chinese, there are other high cultures like in India where they invented zero and didn't get any credit for it. And 1,000 years ago, there was some Indian guy who was working on binary mathematics, and I can see doing that with computers, but it's hard to see doing it with a pencil and paper.
Well, you
Yeah,
can't justify colonialism if the Western way isn't the best. So
Right, that's right. I think you're right there, Jim.
yeah, we'll give that to Meyer. So I think the only question, sorry, Bob, but I think the only question that arises from the readings is should Meyer and everyone in the Hoover Institute be taken out and shot to put us out of their misery?
yeah. I mean, I like the quote from Jean-Paul Sartre: "Man is
Whoop, you froze, Paul.
condemned to meaning." And Christians go to the Bible, Muslims go to the Quran because they cannot understand that they cannot tolerate not having meaning. But when you talk about the universe, I mean, you think about what's infinity. How does your mind get around the idea of infinity? There's no end to the universe. All kinds of things like this. So basically, you just have to say some things we don't know, and we probably never will know.
Mhm.
And maybe
Michael,
shouldn't know.
you're lurking there. Do you have anything to say or add to the discussion? Michael Swords? Nope. Okay.
Yeah, he comes in often on a cell phone and has sometimes had trouble connecting.
Joyce, I haven't really heard from you.
Oh, well, I really don't know what I think about whether there's a God or not. I think it's probably like I was saying earlier, that it's whatever it is that we don't know, the maybe a magic or an energy in the universe or something like that. But I don't think that it's something that you can prove. And I sometimes I think these books, they're written as a way to try to justify a person's own belief. So it's kind of like you come up with the answer and then you write the justifications to
Right.
get there.
What it reminded me of,
Unbelief is
I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
intolerable. I mean, with a certain kind of mind, and I think that's a spiritual attitude, if you like. That there has to be a meaning out there, and then some people say there isn't a meaning. Whatever meanings there are, you just generate your own meaning, and I think that's what this guy is doing. He has this compulsion that he must have an explanation, and there really isn't an explanation.
Well, one of the problems I see is that it's like going back to the Scopes trial, if you remember that, and creationism. And it's a
Uh-huh.
recycling of creationism and the threat of teaching that in school. Because creationism is not a science, it's a theology.
Right. Correct.
Well, intelligent design is just rehashed creationism. But it was designed to get around the Supreme Court decision that you couldn't teach creationism in science class because it wasn't science. So they came up with intelligent design. Anyone who studied the evolution of the eye, for example, would know immediately that there wasn't anything intelligent about it at all. Uh, Pure happenstance. It all started out with a mutation in the skin of some aquatic animal that was light sensitive for some reason, and that creature survived better, bred more, and over millions of years, it worked its way into the eye. So nothing intelligent, just good old mutation. I mean, Meyer's a good example of non-adaptive mutation. Uh, but so mutation is not always good, but usually non-adaptive mutations uh, end up with the demise of both the individual and the species. So far, it hasn't worked on Meyer, but I'm sure it'll work its way around.
So the conclusion on Meyer leads to whether or not we have predetermination under his view. And what does that do with free will?
Free will is a very marvelous illusion, sort of like chocolate milkshakes. Uh, they may not exist, but they're really good to have around. Um, we're all machines in the sense that everything that happens has in fact been predetermined. But so what? Uh, each person alive, each animal, each creature, each rock is because of something that happened prior to that time. But we're all machines. And do we want machines that act in a predetermined way that is for good? Or do we want machines that are predetermined to act in ways which are evil? And what is good? What is evil? Well, we each have to decide that. I think that good is when people like Norman Woods are in the world who go about helping people, and they do so because it makes them feel good. Some people are in the world who think causing pain is good because it makes them feel good. Well, I don't want those people in my life. Uh, so the fact that there's nothing praiseworthy about who we are, it's just a question of are we being productive or not? And that's enough for me. I don't need anything more than that.
Don't you want to know what dark matter is? Don't you want to try and understand quantum entanglement? You know, when there's a particle in one part of the universe and something happens to it, and it happens to another particle. Don't you want to know these things?
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, I figured out entanglement. So um, it's not a real problem. Everyone says, well, how can entanglement work? Because it goes faster than the speed of light. And no, it's sort of like dark matter. We just don't understand it yet. But I think that whatever the singularity was that existed before the Big Bang, whatever it was obviously very small. And everything was very much connected back then. You could say everything was entangled before the Big Bang. It was all squashed down into a little tiny, infinitely small something. So why don't we just say that before the Big Bang, everything was entangled. Then there's a Big Bang and only some things are entangled. What the entanglement is, we'll figure out later. But we do know something can't go faster than the speed of light. Therefore, whatever is happening with entanglement isn't about things moving, it's about things connected by some force that we don't know anything about yet. No big deal. We'll get there. Maybe.
Now, also on the point of first cause, one of the things that is interesting to me about the kind of Hindu Advaita Vedanta ideas that I've been studying for 30 years is they say that the universe did not begin, it has always been. And so it never started. And that's what you were talking about, James, the infinite series that goes on.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with that idea. I mean, it may not be the correct idea, but there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the idea of an infinite universe. Remember, as Voltaire pointed out so wisely, there is no difference between the infinitely large and the infinitely small. We always think of infinity or eternity as being big. It doesn't have any size. Infinitely large and infinitely small are exactly the same. That's what the Big Bang Theory tells us, I think.
Well, I find some of this conversation rather obscure to my simple mind. Um, um, so if I bring it back to the UU Fellowship, I mean, where does the UU Fellowship sit in terms of the hypothesis of God?
That it's an individual matter and viewpoint. We have people who are staunch long-term atheists, and we have people who are theists, and we have people in between.
Including Christians.
Do I interpret it right that it could be something like this? Because I mean, this is the path that I've pretty much started to travel, and that is, in your earlier life, you were sent to Sunday school and sort of exposed to religion of some sort or another. And then in the fullness of your life, thinking your way through things, you come to realize that that's not the whole story. So that's why I am about a 50%
Yes.
Anglican, because there's about 50% that I say, no, frankly, I don't agree with it. I don't even believe it. And so therefore, it looks as though, to me, as though a UU fellow is someone who had some religion at an earlier point in their life that involved God or Allah or whoever it was, and thinking about it, came to realize that there was another point of view and brought their religious aspects, the part they agreed with or believed in, with them to UU, which is more based on science, reason, and so on. Is that a correct assessment?
Well, certainly, I think a lot of people from at UU were something else first. There are a few that came into it from the childhood, but certainly you're right about a lot of the people that are there, and that's why one of the UU principles that brings us together is the idea of the search for truth. You know, we're all trying to figure out what's going on, and that we share, even though we don't necessarily know what the answer is, and we're suspicious of somebody who comes in and tries to give us the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with that.
Yeah, one of the principles of UU is that everyone is on a different journey and a different path. And we accept the fact that they are on that journey, and their path may not be my path, but it is still their path. And then their search for truth in their way.
And your 7 principles are unarguable.
Well, they're not dogma.
No, but they're
And in fact,
unarguable. I mean,
right.
they're for the greater benefit of mankind.
Yes.
And it's interesting, the 7 principles are something that the UU reviews periodically, and we have a new set of principles that are now coming out. I don't remember what they are.
Well, they take
They're
the
similar.
7, they take the 7 principles and our historical paths and put them through the lens of love. And not that we disregard or cast aside the 7 principles. We just have a new paradigm to look at things through
Right.
the concept of love for each other and for humanity and the world.
And talking of that, I think most Unitarians don't believe if God exists that he's an omnibenevolent God. I think most of us think that God is supremely indifferent to what happens to us.
Yes, I definitely think most Unitarians don't believe God is involved in every aspect of our lives. I saw someone, was talking about sex, and she said, well, God, determined what sex you were going to be before you were born. And I don't think Unitarians believe that God is so involved that God decides, which sperm hits which egg before you're conceived. So I think whether Unitarians believe in God or not, they don't believe in that type of God.
So Unitarians don't believe that God rolls the dice, huh?
The thing that I occasionally have fun doing is asking people who believe that God exists and is all knowing, and if I don't believe in that God, that I should be burned at the stake. There are many other reasons why I might be burned at the stake, but that's the one they usually offer. And so I then ask them the question, well, you've been talking about intelligent design and God's design of the universe. Do you think that there's any evidence that humans are the ultimate evolutionary creation that God had in mind? What if humans are just another part of the grand design that's heading for something a lot better than what we are, and that God really doesn't give a damn about us any more than he does about ants? They're all part of his design process that's been going on for millions of years. It will end up with a final product that's, something God does care about. That usually sparks the conversation.
Does that answer your question?
Hmm?
ABC, I'm sorry, I forgot your first name.
Frank.
Frank, does that answer your question, Frank?
Well, in an obscure way, yes. Actually, I'm interested to do what I would call a straw poll on the screen. And that goes back to my thesis that people that end up in the UU fellowship have come by some other religious route earlier in their lives. And I wondered, you know, each one of you, what religious exposure you had from an early age.
Well, I'll start. I was raised Catholic and went to school through elementary through university.
I'm an
Catholic school.
Anglican. I went to an Anglican boarding school, paid no attention whatsoever. I would have thought that I was subliminally brainwashed, but I wasn't. But it's not that I am aware of. And it was later in life that a whole lot of other things became more sensible to me.
I was raised a Seventh-day Adventist and went all the way through Seventh-day Adventist boarding schools in high school.
I'm sorry, what was
The
the
Seventh-day Adventist, it's
Oh,
the
Seventh-day
form
Adventist, yes.
of Protestantism.
Yes, okay, thanks.
I was raised in Oklahoma, which is a pretty conservative religious area. My mother was a mystic and would go down as a child and talk to Jesus by the Red River. You're supposed to love Jesus there, but you weren't supposed to actually talk to him, you know. And so I had these other ideas. She studied at the School for Esoteric Studies by mail order and stuff like that. And so by the time I had 10, I had heard about reincarnation and all of this other stuff. And I went to UU's as a teenager in San Jose. And then for the next 50 years, I spent 25 years studying Buddhism, and then the last 30 years deeply studying a particular kind of teaching that is Hindu, Advaita Vedanta and Ramana Maharshi. And when I came to Chapala, I was taken because of Bob Coaches was speaking at UU and I knew him through some other way. I went there and I realized that UUs would be accepting even of crazy people like me.
Well, that's your assumption.
That's your-
Well, they let me in still.
Very good.
Well, my background, I started taking myself to churches when I was 5. I grew up in foster homes, so I was always looking for some connection.
Taking yourself to churches.
Yes, I mean, as a 5-year-old, I'd find the church and go.
Wow.
Yeah, so I started off with the Anglican church and I liked it because I got to be in the Christmas pageant, the Angel Gabriel. And then I went to several other Protestant denominations. And then when I was 9, the Mormons came to my door and I thought it was fascinating that there was this ladder that you could climb up and stuff. So I studied with them for 2 years. Then the Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door. Actually, I was 7. The Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door when I was 9. And they took me to a meeting and I immediately felt that I belonged. And I was very committed Jehovah's Witness for like 14 years. I was like a missionary and so on. And it's actually the complete opposite of how I feel today. After that, when I left my marriage and so on at 21, I studied with the Hare Krishna. I studied with Wicca for a couple of years. I just explored. But I always realized, and the Baha'i, I actually have a lot of respect for the Baha'i faith. And when I started going to a Unitarian church, I don't know, in 10, 20 years ago, it felt right. It just felt right because, well, all roads lead to Rome. Whatever your idea of Rome is and whoever you are, you can find a path. And again, it all comes down to being the kind of person that this world needs, that's all it's about.
Here, here.
Yeah.
Who hasn't fessed up?
Let's see. My parents were both New England Presbyterians. I got carted off to Sunday school. I wore glasses then and did my homework, so I got beat up at Sunday school. Convinced my mother I wasn't learning anything at Sunday school, and that could I stay home and read the Bible. She said, fine. This was when I was 7. I finished the Bible before I was 8 and became an atheist, and I've been an atheist ever since.
Well,
I mean, basically, my my parents didn't believe in any of the
whoops, you froze.
organized religions. So, I mean, very quickly I became a humanist, and all the problems that afflict the world or this planet, or wherever we live, can only be solved by human beings coming together and using empathy and intelligence. That's the only salvation for us, for human beings to use the intelligence that we have, and for us to clear up the mess that we're making of this planet.
And my interest uh, through this kind of spiritual, then Buddhist, then Hindu path has always been on, kind of personal growth. And it really started from me trying to figure out what the heck is going on in here. It's crazy, you know? There was a time I was going to a psychiatrist in my early 20s. My mother was a therapist and I worked for IBM and they paid for all of it, so it was free. And I was going to a psychiatrist because then I figured out my biggest problem is me.
Has that changed over the years, Richard?
No, that still is true. Even my computer, the biggest problem my computer has is its user.
We haven't heard from Michael or Norman yet.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay. I was born, raised Presbyterian, raised, educated all the way through college, 2 years of seminary, and it all didn't make sense. I became involved in the seminary had a program called Alternative Futures in Ministry and Experiment in Communal Learning. So for 1 year, I lived in a commune, and we lived and dealt with all the hippies in San Francisco. Ran an urban farm, had a food co-op and free school and all that kind of stuff. But then I became attracted to the Black church. I found in the Black church a sense of meaning and purpose that the white church left me very cold. Then I moved to the mountains and basically had no religion, no formal religion for 45, 50 years. A personal study of everything, of anything that came along. I would pick it up, study it, follow it for whatever it would go. But I've really enjoyed your conversation here this morning. I personally can't help but believe there is some order in my life, in life, in all of life. There is an order that I recognize. And then when I was in high school, there came a real strong push of fundamentalism. My mother had a conversion experience. An uncle had a conversion experience, became a minister, Church of God minister. There was a whole big push of that. And that never did make much sense to me, the real fundamentalist. But I would have to say that, well, first of all, when I found the UU, that was like home. When I came to UU just a year and a half ago, I just felt totally at home, totally at peace with all of it. But it was interesting. I did read a couple of the announced readings, It was interesting how the main source, it sounded exciting, and then all the other people, they just destroyed him. So, but I still have to come down. I still have a faith in order. There seems to be order to me in the universe that affects my life, and I spend my time trying to relate to that orderliness. Back to Christianity, Jesus is not my savior, but he is my friend. He is my companion. I live a life kind of in relationship to Jesus. But again, not as my savior. He's just a teacher, a leader, an inspiration. But I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm glad I got in, Ellen.
It,
Go ahead,
I
Joe.
have to take off, guys. Thank you very much, Bob. I will see you
Okay.
next time.
Bye.
Bye. Yes.
Unlike most of you, I wasn't a religious wanderer. So that I really haven't experienced other versions of Christianity. And I had never really thought of exploring, the Eastern religions that Richard refers to. But what I found was that really Anglicanism, as I sort of experienced, it really didn't sort of touch me in any way. And quite honestly, I sort of wandered through life, knowing about or hearing about God, Christ, and the Holy Spirit. And in the end, a few years ago, I came to the conclusion that really all three were just part of a spiritual package deal. And that really sort of thinking of them as though they were people didn't make much sense to me. And so a couple of years ago, I sort of wrote down what my beliefs really were. And I found that they weren't religious, actually, they were philosophical.
Mhm.
And that was partly why, out of curiosity, a few months ago, I attended the first UU fellowship meeting. And, it touched other parts of me that were not touched by Anglicanism.
Mm-hmm.
That's my story.
Now, also from the Hindu stuff that I've been studying, one of the things that's interesting is from this Advaita Vedanta, the particular kind of Hinduism, its ideas is that, the God that most people think about is at the same level as your ideas of yourself and other people in the world. It's your idea of God, not God. And they posit then some higher order God. They call it Brahman, which they say is the vast absolute. And so the idea that most people have about God is this smaller idea, the idea that's kind of on a personal mental level. And what I'm trying to focus on is something that goes beyond the cognitive mental level, but it's still something you can know. I exist and I know that I exist, and this is not mental or conceptual, and I'm just trying to understand what's going on with that. What exists? Is it my body? Is it consciousness? So just what is going on?
Does it matter?
Sorry, couldn't understand you.
Doesn't matter.
I said, does it matter?
Ah,
To some of us, it does. For some of us, that's what the search is all about. It's, we call it God, but it's true, Richard. I believe that we're always looking to understand ourselves. And we use different paths to try to do that. Religion is one of them.
Mm-hmm. And so for me, one of the things
haven't heard.
Go ahead, James.
I haven't heard from Norman yet.
I was born and raised Unitarian. I, from an early age, I was an atheist.
Mm-hmm. So you are one the Unitarians have always been your home.
Mm.
Sort of like an original Californian, very rare.
Right.
You know, it was interesting to me. I attended one of your fellowship meetings a couple of weeks ago, in which Matt Alsbar gave a sermon, if I can call it that, on the subject of quantum mechanics. And, you know, the contrast between Father James in the Anglican service and then moving over and listening to Matt from the sublime to the ridiculous. Tell me, I mean, your fellowship, how did they, shall we say, grasp what Matt was saying?
It was a wide spectrum of grasping.
Yes.
I know that if you go back and look at previous sermons, I gave a talk on system science, the interconnected web, and love. That was similar in approach, trying to explain hard science and how it affected us, and where love and the interconnected web all fit in.
That would have been interesting. I'd like to have heard it.
You can. It's on YouTube.
Under the LCUU banner?
Yeah.
And you could find it on the website. There's a place where they have YouTube videos of past services. So we have a couple of years worth of services on YouTube.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I've always found helpful in trying to understand the quantum world is to realize, think about Schrodinger's cat and ask yourself, does it make a difference if it's Schrodinger's crocodile? Just think about that, and I think you'll get a better grasp of quantum mechanics once you've analyzed whether Schrodinger's crocodile makes any difference. Okay.
Well, what I found that I took away from Matt's two-part sermon was that the Newtonian physics that I have lived with all these years was no longer valid, or not fully valid.
Right.
But I decided it didn't really matter.
Newtonian physics works just fine unless you're approaching the speed of light or dealing with subatomic particles. Since we don't go through life under either of those conditions, stick with Newton. It's the only way to prevent hitting your thumb with a hammer.
Right, I'll stay with that.
Good.
So let's do a round. What do you think? What do you think of this concept of intelligent design versus non-intelligent design, and the proof of God?
Well, just before we go on, so what is unintelligent design?
There is no unintelligent design. Lack of intelligent design.
Lack of.
It's
It would be the negative of the non-existent.
random interactions.
Random. Okay, so that's the difference.
And let's always keep in mind that when humans think of randomness, what they're really talking about is they don't understand.
Right.
Humans
And
always call something they don't understand random. It isn't.
also,
Everything is ordered.
I was an intelligence analyst for a while, and one of the things I started to understand then was human random. And if you ask humans to generate a random series of numbers, it's not going to be random.
Exactly.
The whole purpose of science is trying to make sense and predictability out of this randomness,
Right.
so that you can replicate the results for better understanding.
And it's random, and we have this force moving through the universe that this time around started with this Big Bang. It's interesting now with the web, they have hints of something that existed before the Big Bang. So that kind of showed that this was not a single shot universe.
James, you told me before, and I'd like you to go a little farther on it. You told me that the Big Bang is a misconception in terminology. Can you explain that?
I don't recall that conversation, but yeah,
Is that ad libitum?
as Richard says, the Big Bang isn't the beginning of anything. It's a continuation of that which has been going on as long as forever, eternity. Uh, Something existed prior to the Big Bang, we wouldn't have had the Big Bang. Um, and the last time, Bob, you and I talked about that concept was in terms of Meyer's concluding comment that the Genesis and scientific cosmology are in agreement, because he claimed that the Bible says that in the beginning was light, and that's what the Big Bang Theory says, which of course is absolutely wrong. Uh, Science tells us that after the Big Bang, there were photons, electrons, neutrons, and other particles, but there wasn't any light.
Right. It took a while for light to show up.
Took millions, at least hundreds of thousands of years for light to show up. So this is just another example. Somebody asked, I think it was Heather, uh, uh, what was wrong with what Meyer said? Well, from beginning to end, and literally his last comment that the Genesis and Big Bang science are compatible is just simply wrong. That science says light didn't begin for hundreds of thousands of years after the Big Bang. So Genesis and science are not compatible in that regard. Sorry, Bob, I can't remember the conversation.
Well, actually, I was the one responsible for derailing Bob's question. No, I interrupted Bob's question because he was, I guess, trying to sum up where we are.
No, I wasn't. I was the next question I have is basically your final comments on the topic today. Richard?
Well, I don't know if God created the world in some kind of order. My question still, as I had said, is more about me. What I'm sure of is that I exist and I know that I exist. And that's what I'm working on.
Michael?
That sounds pretty good, Richard. That's all I know for sure. I am here.
Right.
And it's
go ahead.
evolutionary, or It's developing all the time. But
Your final comments?
Who?
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No. I wasn't sure who Bob asked for.
Okay. Frank, you can go ahead. Now I'll come back to Heather.
Well, my thoughts were gelled a little bit a moment ago. I tell you what, carry on, and maybe those thoughts will come back to me.
Okay. Heather?
Oh, geez, the same issue. No, not this time. The definition of God, or the way God is acknowledged by Judeo-Christian tradition and many others, is not someone I would like to be friends with. Maybe that's a big part of why I don't want to believe in God. On the same token, when I'm ill and I'm scared, I do want to believe in God. So I don't know. I really don't know. But I have always wanted and felt to have a reverence for something, and perhaps it's nature. I do feel a reverence, and I want to honor that reverence. But to what it is, I don't know. And I also lean towards what Richard's saying.
Norman?
The only thing that's relevant to me is here and now.
That's the only thing that exists.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's true.
Frank, go ahead.
Well, I believe man has a basic need for a higher being. And I'll just tell you how I came to sort of sense this, and that was I was hitchhiking through Africa on my way back to England. And, you know, I'm standing on the side of the road and I see these little rondavels and little shambas, little gardens with vegetables and things in them. And of course, East Africa is subject to 2 heavy rainy seasons. And Africans don't have much of a forward view of laying up food. So they just plant what they need for the year. Well, that's not fine, because if they don't harvest whatever they've grown before the rains come, the rains wash them out. And this is a sort of fictional imagination, but I can imagine this black person who has planted this little shamba comes out and stands out there and rails at heavens and said, God, why have you washed away my garden? Because he knows nothing else. He's never encountered religion of any sort. He's only got whatever tribal beliefs there were, and I don't know what they are. But that moment, I suddenly thought to myself, man does need to be able to refer to a higher being in times of hopelessness. That's my thought about God. So I sort of feel as though man, Frank, needs a higher being at times to refer to. And, you know, being spiritual Frank is happy to be in touch with those three, the Trinity, as a package deal of spirits. That's
James?
Excuse me.
I like that.
James, are you there?
I'm here.
No, not Frank, James.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yes. Well, I'll be damned if I need a higher being. I've rejected that a long time ago. So at least one man on the planet doesn't have a basic need for a higher God. As for the black man on the side of the road, I merely point out that religion, at its very earliest stages, was formulated by the ancestors of that black man
Hello.
by the side of the road. And thus, you could say that Judeo-Christian religion is actually based on what that black man was talking about.
Mhm.
Well, we've had a very interesting discussion. next month, our humanist discussion group will explore
Hello.
the question. We'll explore the question whether women govern better than men.
That's an interesting subject.
Yes, it is. And the
Like
subject came up before, way before Kamala Harris was on her presidential run. I selected this topic about a month and a half ago. Just
Very appropriate.
Pardon? It turns out it's appropriate now, but I thought it was very interesting as a topic a couple months ago. So
Regardless, yes, I agree with you.
yeah. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining in.
Bob, thank you so much for all the work that you do pulling this together. It's really important for me. Thank you. Thank you very much. And for everyone involved.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
And Frank,
Thank you for the reading list.
yeah,
Yes.
Frank, if you send me your email address, I'll put you on the list for future.
Okay, good. I'd like that.
And I'll even send you the list of stuff that we discussed today so that you can take a look at that video.
Yes, I'd like to sort of see the background. I mean, the underlying title was very challenging, very thought-provoking.
Mhm.
Yes.
Bob does that. It's really irritating. Bob forces your brain to think, which especially early in the morning can really drive a guy crazy. But thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
Thank you all for letting me join.
Anytime, Frank.
Nice
Good to
meet
see you.
Nice to meet you.
Next time.
You have my email address, Frank, or can you find it?
I think it's on, is it in letter number 70 that I've just received? I saw your name there, Bob Coaches.
At gmail.com.
Okay, all right. Yes, I will send it to you, Bob.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Bye,
Great
everyone.
seeing you guys. Bye-bye.
Everybody else.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.